Okay. So I guess for anyone that's watching, I'll just give a quick overview. So we're going to be adding a new auth concept to SST that does not use Cognito. So this will be something you can drop in into your Stacks code and then just have auth working out of the box without, having to use Cognito, because we've run into issues with the past. People don't love it. It's not the best service. So we want to provide something lightweight that still can do a lot of the stuff that we see people use Cognito for. So this demo it's like the first demo of what the API for that can look like. Does that make sense? Anything to add, two of you?
No, yeah, I would just say for the viewers out there, and, and maybe for me specifically, let's do a very 101 type intro before we go into details.
Yeah, that makes sense. So I think the way we could do this is we can start with what the API for the developer looks like, and then we can go into how some of that's implemented and what constraints we have because of that. All right, let me
Yeah.
How do I do this again? I pin myself. There we go. Assuming you can't see any of this. Let me actually rework my layout. We're gonna need the browser. Okay. Is this readable?
Yep.
Okay. So the way this works. So the approach we're going to take is we're going to ship a Lambda function on your behalf. So I haven't come up with the exact API in the Stacks code, but effectively, like, what we want to do is attach auth functionality to your API. So we're going to provide a way to deploy a function where you don't really have to do any of the implementation. It'll just work, and it'll serve for a bunch of different auth use cases. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Yeah, so some options here are like this works, but I think we talked about before where like this anything with this proxy thing is maybe weird. So some other options are like we have a separate construct and that takes the API and that'll attach the routes. Another option is to do like something part of the API and add it there. We have to figure out how this is all going to change, like fit in with Cognito and the other authorization stuff we currently have. What I like about putting it separate is that we don't have to touch any of the existing stuff. It'll all still work for anyone that wants to use it. We don't really have to document it anywhere in our main tutorial. And it'll just look like either what I have right now or something like the other thing I showed where you do like new auth that or API.add auth or something. I don't know. We should like think about that and figure out how that looks. But for what it effectively needs to do is it just needs to put one catch-all route, and it's going to be a single function that handles all the stuff that needs to happen. So the way you define the configuration for this is by so you still have to create the function. So you have to like create a function that does auth, but instead of implementing the actual function handler, you just call this handle thing. So this will be probably something like this, auth.handle. And you can pass it in a list of named providers. So you can say, I have this Google provider. Here's a client ID for it. So I did a shim here for the config. This isn't secret, so it's fine that I'm streaming it. So like once we have the config here, you just pass in, config.whatever. And then you can specify an onSuccess callback. In the onSuccess callback, you'll get this payload, and this is type safe. So depending on the provider, you'll get something different. So for Google, you get all these things. You can imagine if we have an email provider, the config here might look like a little bit different. You might have like a send email thing, and this you can like figure out how to send the actual email if you want to like template it. The onSuccess, you're not going to get much. You're going to get just the email. So the idea here is each provider can give like very type safe callbacks. This is different than, so I did some research on some other stuff out there like Next.js Auth. So Next.js
Sorry, really
Auth,
quickly, what is this file again?
So this is a function handler, basically. This is what you're pointing that route to.
Mm-hmm.
This creates a function for you.
Oh, interesting. So in this case, it's like you have to. So we're providing this, or
no? This is what you're looking at would be in your code, in like the end user's code base.
I think what Jay might be missing. I'm not sure if he was in our last conversation where he would Jay, you would probably have you have a front end. So imagine like this is a Google provider, right? On the front end, you have the login with Google button. You will click that button, and it will redirect to an endpoint that is your APIs/auth route, right?
okay.
So this handler is handling the callback from Google login. Is that right, Dax?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, so just quickly on the front end, it's exactly what Frank said. You'll call something like this. You'll pass in which provider you want to use. So like if you click the Google button, you'll do this, and it'll redirect to your API to authorize. But this is basically you're defining the configuration for what types of auth your system wants to use.
Right. So going back like that, the previous point you're making about the stacks code, then it's effectively like they're adding this, right? This function, right? So it's not like we're not really providing it per se, right?
Yeah, we're not providing it because it needs like runtime information, like the stuff that needs to happen in these callbacks.
Okay, got it.
If it was purely configuration, then we would just put it probably in the stacks code.
Yeah. Okay.
But because these callbacks need to fire, yeah. So what you would typically do in this callback is, so this is what we're not doing. We're not providing like a user system. I think we can step towards like a template that has like a user system built into it. But I think from what I've looked at, a lot of like Cognito, a lot of these auth providers, as soon as they start stepping into doing user management for you, that's where everything starts to suck. And that's what I liked a lot about WorkOS. They didn't do any user management. They basically just gave you a callback, and they were like, in this callback, we will give you guaranteed proof that this user is this person. You decide what to do from there. So you would probably do something like, does the user exist? User from email, something like that. If they don't exist, you would create them. And then you can then redirect to your front end with a session, which I haven't implemented yet, but I want to give people a way to easily do sessions, but I'm not going to talk about that here. So all that I'm demoing is how you set up providers and how you get like an authorized callback. So
that's on the callback. Usually Google gives you some sort of like a token, right? Does it give you like a refresh token, an access token, right? How are we handling that?
So this is kind of what I figured out yesterday. There's two types of authorization methods. There's OIDC and OAuth. OIDC is basically saying it's for flows where I don't need to interact with Google's APIs. I just want to like reuse the fact that someone has a Google account with my system. So I don't care about like checking the user's calendar events or like looking at their email. I'm just using Google purely as an identity provider. So this provider, and we probably need to rename these. Like this is technically a Google OIDC provider. So in the callback, you don't get any Google tokens. You just get information about their identity. And this is
It's like a
simplified.
JWT token? Or...
The fact it is a JWT token, but this is hidden from you. Like this is
right.
like they do give it to you as JWT, but there's no requirement that that's the case. I think.
I see. And
the idea is like once a flow finishes, you have a verified payload of here's a bunch of information about this person, and you can trust that it's accurate.
I see. And what the Google OIDC provider does is pretty much just decoding that token and then giving you like a JSON payload.
Yeah, basically. And like we'll step through the internals of it in a second. The other one, OAuth. So this is usually because you want some additional permission. So if this was an OAuth provider, so these are the standard ones. You might say like, I want access to their calendar. I want access to their email. I want access to Drive. Then in the payload, you'll get like a access token and a refresh token and all that stuff, depending on what you configure here. But I think to start, we can just start with the OIDC stuff because like some subset of our users are going to actually need to talk to Google for like information. The rest probably just want a simple login flow. Like Seed is a good example, right? Like we probably want to allow login with Google, but we don't need anything from Google, right? So I think we can start with OIDC providers, and then we can do the OAuth ones for people building like very specific integrations.
I see. And people like Google, Facebook, these common ones, they all provide both OIDC and OAuth.
Yeah, so OIDC is built on top of OAuth. So most people that were shipping an OAuth thing just like updated it for the new spec. I would actually love to have this handler itself be an OIDC provider, and there's some benefits from doing. It's like a federated provider, like so. This could also follow that spec. So anyone that's expecting an OIDC way to log in, this would provide that. But like it wouldn't actually do it. It would forward it to another OIDC provider, and those can forward to another one. Like you can like federate it in that way. Right now, it's like I don't know the spec enough to implement it, but it's not that important. But I think eventually, we want our auth thing to be like spec compliant.
I didn't quite get that part out. What will be required for that?
Yeah, so there's a. Let me see if I can find it. Like well known. So you have to implement like this endpoint, and you kind of say like, here's how you authorize. Here's like the scope. There's like different handshakes you can do. That here's what we support, and here's like the scopes we support, etc. So this could be one of the built-in routes that we add to your API.
Right.
And these will all point just like to other routes in your API. But so theoretically, if you have some kind of OAuth, OIDC library using in like your iOS app, it should just be able to plug into this. So if you look at the actual Google provider, I don't specify any of this stuff. I just do issuer.discover, and it figures out like all the stuff that needs to happen. So your front end can do issuer.discover and point to your API and then like be hooked up. That's it. And then like this library we have here might be less necessary. But again, I don't understand this well enough to say exactly if we should do it and how.
I see.
That actually seems like really interesting in that like the part that you said where like that library might not be as necessary, because then it's just like any other OIDC thing. And
yeah,
I like
basically,
that.
Yeah, basically,
Makes
there's
sense.
this thing that I sent yesterday. This is a front end library just to do this. So you could just install this and then pass in your API here. And like you can make up a client ID. It doesn't really matter. And this library will just work with our stuff. Yeah, I think that's like the end goal. Okay. So let me delete this stuff that's making this not compile. Okay, so right now in the callback, I'm not doing anything interesting. So I did look at some other auth provider, or not providers, auth libraries like Next.js. Sorry, Next Auth. So there's a question of like, should this on success just be moved over here? So it's not like one per provider, just one global one whenever there's a success. And I think this is what Next Auth does.
Mhm.
But then you lose like the ability for this payload to be like type safe per provider. I think like they try to normalize it into a single type. I think that's going to be a little confusing. And like I said, like for the email provider, like you're only going to have the email. So I think it gives us more flexibility to specify it in here.
I guess you could create a on success function and then point everything to
Yeah, just like
success.
compose it. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. You can do this yourself if you want just one.
Right.
Okay, so the way this currently works is it generates this auth or here. It generates this URL and you pass in this provider query parameter for which one of the providers you want to use. And when you click it, it'll effectively run this function. You're not really aware of the internals. Then you can log in, and then your callback is fired. So this all works. Does it make sense?
No. Wait, that URL. Oh, so we're not just defining the callback. We're defining both the starting point URL to like trigger that. So this is where the front end, the button would link to, right?
This is where the front end would link to, yeah. So
Okay.
this gets forwarded to Google, and
Right.
they could have like 10 steps here. It doesn't matter. Like they can say log in, do two-factor auth. Like they can do whatever they want, and then they'll forward to callback. And here we have like a correctly implemented callback receiver that does all like the security, there's a bunch of like security checking steps that I know I've always skipped, but now I actually.
So this function that we're looking at then is doing like multiple things.
Yeah.
And then
that's why he was using proxy, right?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, right.
Routes.
But then I guess the confusing part is like, so what is handle doing then? Like it's not particularly related to like the event handler, right? Like it's
something. It's like conceptually, it's something like this.
But I mean,
I guess
it is an event handler. It does multiple things. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess behind the scene, like this handler is doing two
There's
things,
like
right? One is forwarding. I see.
Yeah.
And then the user, like from a user's perspective, configuring this handler, he or she, they're not going to be like configuring the authorized part or the callback part. They're just configuring the handler as a whole. That's what the API looked like, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah.
All right.
And I think conceptually they shouldn't even be thinking about like the routes and like this flow at all. They should just be like, I'm just giving my API auth capabilities. That might involve like creating a bunch of routes. It could even end up creating like other resources. It could like create a Dynamo table for something like for storing passwords. There's kind of it's like the auth construct.
This might be a separate topic to talk about, but this is a new concept, right? from like SST's perspective, this is like a fundamentally new concept, and it is a bit strange.
Right,
Yeah,
because
because
I feel like our
go
auth
ahead.
construct, right? Be auth, like cognito stuff being a construct feels like it's a thing, right? Like this thing we're doing, it feels like we're just adding a route, and that feels more abstract on.
Feels more what?
I mean, it feels more abstract. It didn't feel like we're adding auth to the app. I mean, I'm probably biased, but I felt like having a class and stuff feels
No, but
like
even
you're doing a
even
thing,
the thing
right?
that you're saying, Frank, of like it looks like you're adding a route. Like it's not
Mm-hmm.
really adding a route either. Why? I mean, technically it is, but like it's just that like so here's what my thing was. I looked at the route definition before, and I was expecting this to look like a Lambda function, and it kind of does, I guess, right? But at the same time, it's like, yeah, it's doing multiple things, right? Like there are two different routes within it, right? So it is interesting. So then you're kind of like you're basically telling the user, hey, just give me the config for how to handle like all these routes, and we'll kind of go do that for you.
Yeah, I want to try to like hide. Like they shouldn't set this up and think like, oh, it's adding routes to my API. That is what it's doing, but like it could do more than that. It could do other stuff. Like it could evolve into doing more. So like right now it's a simple pre-built function that is going to handle these two routes. But that's not what I want it to feel like if possible. That's why I think the API that we decide on in the Sax code will kind of determine that. Maybe, but also maybe it's better to go the other way. Like I'm not too sure yet. Like it could make sense to think of it as, oh yeah, like we're helping you build functions. Because if you think about the event
exactly,
bus situation, that
Yep,
feels
yep.
like, yeah, you're helping me build event bus handlers. Like that makes sense.
Yeah, which is why I think for this specific API, I would, and this might not end up being the case, but I kind of want to see the other handlers that we might have, and what does that feel like conceptually, and is this one just going to be like a completely different one from all the other guys, or is it like is there some similar patterns between them?
Yeah.
And we can talk about this after, but
the fact that this is handling two routes is kind of an implementation detail. Like we could just have like, I think we could just make everything go to the same route. Like one would be a get, the other would be a post. I tried to follow like what I see before.
Okay, I think then the thinking is right. Then it's like it doesn't make sense to expose the idea of the route even. Okay. Huh.
Yeah.
This is
like
a new step.
Like for me, I like this way of writing handler doesn't bother me at all. I feel it's pretty consistent with how we're doing the GraphQL handler, right? You're just like wrapping around it, providing a bunch of convenience stuff behind the scene. And one handler handling two routes, that doesn't concern me either because you shouldn't even know that OAuth has two URLs that you're dealing with, right? So that shouldn't be. It's really about when something goes wrong, like users not flipping between two Lambda functions and looking for errors, right? You should just go to the console and be like, okay, what's wrong with my auth flow? I think that's a part we completely hide from the user. Like I was saying, my only weird thing is, I'm not thinking this is bad. The only thing I felt weird was like adding seems adding a big feature is really just adding a route to my API. Yeah.
Yeah. This one's interesting. I want to think about it a bit. Okay.
Okay, cool. So this, roughly captures, I guess, everything that the developer has to specify.
Mhm.
So I guess we can jump into what's actually happening now. So basically, with all this stuff, we're going to create a Lambda function for you. I think pretty much everything should probably follow this similar function signature where like, for GraphQL also, it should be like, GraphQL handle and then some configuration. So, it returns a API v2 handler. This is
Sorry,
the
wait.
new.
What are we looking at here again, really quickly? What is this
This
file?
is what's going under the hood when you call handle.
Oh, under the hood. Okay. All right.
So this, like, the user should never see this.
Right.
So we're building a function. This is a new event, the context stuff. I'll skip that for now. Basically, it's pretty straightforward. It's like what you would write on your own. This is just here because we're handling multiple routes. So it's the first part of it. We'll look up the provider from the config. We do a bunch of like cookie state stuff, and then we call this authorized thing. So this is like the specific implementation. So in the Google case, what this does is, so it's using this OpenID client, which is like a modern OAuth client. This is like the same thing that people probably implement 100 times. You initialize a client, you generate this nonce, you create the redirect URL, and then you do the redirect URL. And I also like set some of the nonce cookies here. This is Google specific, but really any OIDC provider is going to have the same. It's going to be pretty much the same. The only difference is this issuer will change.
Yeah.
So like all this code will probably get pulled out of here into something common, and will effectively support any OIDC provider. If you have one that we don't have listed, you can just do this yourself and pass it through. So we effectively support everything with this.
You mean we'll have like generic OIDC provider where you
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
And you can pass the issuer yourself.
Yeah.
So again, nothing too crazy here. So then when the callback comes in, same thing. It'll do that handshake. It'll verify. In the OIDC case, it returns a token set. It'll like verify that. And then you can, it returns the claims, which is the payload I showed earlier. So going back to this handler. So, authorize, we call authorize. When the callback comes in, we call the callback, and then we call your on success callback you defined. I need to figure out what happens for errors and handle all of that, but that's it. And then I just have this like fallback for the auth request if something is wrong. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, so now the context stuff. So I use this new context framework everywhere. I don't think we have to release this public facing yet, but it was a good use case to use it internally. So basically and just to kind of reiterate what context is, it's a way for you to store some state that's globally available over the lifetime of the request. So when the request starts, you can like provide it some state. As stuff goes on, you can like provide more. You can derive other pieces of state from like a root state. So I use that a bunch of places here. So if you look all through here, I have a bunch of, I'm not passing this event around at all, right? I'm not like pulling cookies out of it. I'm not passing it to the authorizer. I'm not doing any of that. I'm just providing it at the beginning of the request. And this kind of sets it globally that this is an API gateway request, and this is like the content of it. Then inside this provider, so for example, in the authorized one, in the in the Google callback, right? So this is triggering the callback. I need to see the form data that was posted to the callback route. So I just call this use form data thing. I also need like a cookie. So I just call use cookie with a cookie I need. So what happens under the hood here is use form data calls use body and then like parses it. Use body calls use event, and if it's if there is a body, it'll like base 64 decode it if that's the case and return body. Use event calls event context use, which gets you that thing at the beginning. And if it's not the type that you asked for, it'll throw an error. So if you try to use this like in an SQS handler, it'll fail. And the other thing I have here is these are all wrapped in memos. So if you call this like 10 times in a request, like this is only called once. Same thing with like, like the cookies are another example. So I have this use cookies hook, gets the event. It'll parse the cookies. If you call this, a bunch of times, it's only going to parse it once. And it's like helper use cookie, which gets you just a specific one.
That's where passing like API into use event. I noticed that you provided the API.
Yeah. So I think the way this needs to go is we need to specify a list of events that we support, and you can actually extend this. So when you start a Lambda function, you specify what type of event it is, and that way, if you like try to like, the issue is if we don't have this here, like this could be at this point, yeah, you can see it can be either of these, and you'd have to like do some kind of like headers and event, and then you can maybe guess that it's the right one.
I see.
So instead of doing that, just be explicit when you ask for the event when you provide it.
I see. Wait, can it not be able to figure out from when you call provide? I guess that, yeah, I guess the API and SQS event, like, do user need to specify, or is that it would be like a mapping we just keep like internally that, or do user have to define that?
Yeah. So to answer your first question, if we just did this, at this point, event context has the content, but doesn't know the shape of it exactly at runtime, right? So to figure out whether it's an API request at runtime, like how do you do that? You kind of have to like inspect the event and try to like, oh, it has headers, it's probably an API v2, right? So instead of that, you just do it explicitly. I don't imagine the user's ever going to call this anywhere. That's kind of what we talked about the last time I demoed context, because we're always going to wrap it. Like, for example, the GraphQL handler is going to call this. The event bus handler is going to call this with like, event bus, or like if it's wrapped around SQS, it'll be an SQS thing. But I don't imagine that this is ever going to like be in anyone's code.
That's true.
But if they call event context.use, they'll get like the type that it is and the event that it is, but they'll have to do the checking themselves. Or they can use like the specific use event and say, okay, I'm looking to get the API event that came out.
I see.
Yeah, Frank, off topic here, or maybe on topic, but how do you feel like using hooks in, in your Lambda function code?
No, this is super clean. This is like, yeah, this is one thing for sure we're going to have, right? Like,
Yeah, and I think the other part of this is like it's taking the straightforward part of hooks, not the confusing part of hooks.
Yeah, you have to use
won't even apply here. Yeah.
You can't call it everywhere.
Yeah, so I think over time we'll provide like just a bunch of these utility hooks. These are like HTTP hooks, or maybe we should call them API hooks because they're the events. They're all based off the API event. Like we can even have like mute hooks that mutate. So I was thinking about this. So you can have like a let's create a new context called response cookie context. And this could just be a map. And you can do, you can have a like add cookie.
Mm.
Const cookies, response, oops. Use the, yeah. So now over the lifetime of your request, you can add cookies progressively, and then at the end, it'll like serialize them into the headers. So I have this issue right now where I do something kind of ugly because I need to allow, like one, like I'm like just manually building the cookie, which isn't great. But it's authorized is going to set some cookies, but also the like that's setting some Google specific cookies, but I'm also setting some just general cookies we also need. So I'm like getting the result and like merging my cookies with the cookies from there. So I think it would maybe be nice to just be able to call add cookie anywhere and know that it's all just going to get merged at the end.
How does that going to get? How is it going to get returned? You're going to call use cookies in the end and then put it inside cookies.
Yeah, something like that. I have to. That's why when you compare it to MIDI, I think all the input transformations we like cleanly solve. So anything that needs to happen like before it hits your business logic code, which is the way they talk about it is there's boilerplate code that needs to run and then your business logic code. We're going to give you a bunch of middleware for the boilerplate stuff, and then it hits your business logic. And then there's some like output transformation stuff. So I'm not sure if that's why like I haven't done anywhere you like save stuff and it gets serialized at the end, because I need to see exactly how we can solve the second half of that. I think it's less important. But yeah, you can imagine like adding headers and stuff like that. It's nice to be able to do.
Right. Like instead of for API, instead of specifying, it is like a HTTP v2 event. You could do HTTP v2 handler or something that that responds a certain thing, and then use cookies, which do cookie automatically.
Yeah, so we would have like kind of similar to this handle. Yeah, I guess we can pass the event and add cookie, add header. This feels like useless because you're just going to return this, but I think this starts to be helpful when you have like utility functions that do other stuff, like my other function, and this function might need to add cookies and headers, and like you would have to like do result and like merge all this stuff, which gets that sucks. I think the first version of this, I don't know if we should give this a name. Like these are like, I don't know, like transforming the output. Like I don't feel confident enough in that yet, but for all the input stuff, I'm really liking the way this works.
Input hooks and output hooks.
Yeah. Exactly. This does a lot of interesting stuff too. It's not in this use case, it's not that interesting, but so there's like a dependency tree here that gets built, right? Like use form value depends on use form data, which depends on use body, which depends on use event. So if for whatever reason, like you would never actually do this, but let's say for some reason you're like within a single request, you're like handling something different. It needs to like erase from the cache all the dependent things that derive from this. So that gets handled as well. So that's what this like context framework does. It gives you global state, lets you derive stuff from the global state. If the global state ever changes, it'll invalidate everything downstream. So next time it's called, it'll recompute.
To clear out the manual stuff, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Yeah, it's. I think where it might be useful is like if in the middle of a request someone upgrades their auth status, if they're like unknown, you know, you set their auth to unknown, then they're like you realize they are someone, you authenticate them, but you want to continue to do stuff on their behalf in that request. Like you might update the existing context. But I think for the most part, I don't imagine people are going to really be creating their own contexts or like doing this too much. Maybe for the multi-tenant stuff they might, but
yeah, like if they have like do login with Google and Facebook and they want kind of merge those identities into, you know, into like same user, right? I see like some stuff might change during the request, but
yeah, so that's I'll just boot this. So this is my this is like how the session stuff is going to work. So sessions are separate than actors. Like they need to be thought of as different things because the session stuff is very tied to how your API works. Actors are like more related to like your core of your system. So in this case, like I have two types of sessions that can happen. And so I like have this use session hook, which, you know, does the same thing. It like pulls the event out, it'll parse the AWT token from the header. And then depending on the type of session it is, I have this other concept called an actor concept, a context. And, you know, if it's in my case, I have kind of like a Slack login system where you can log into a specific workspace, and in that case, you're a user. Or you might have forgotten your workspaces, so you're just like you just authenticated your email, and like you're not actually logged into any of the workspaces yet. You're just able to look at the list of your workspaces. So I have these two like login sessions, and because of that, I have like these two actors. So this will provide. So like, you know, at the beginning of the section of the set of the request, it'll decide, oh, this is for a root actor or this is for a user actor for a specific workspace. The root actor just, you know, all you know about them is their email. So I think this is another context that we can provide, and we can let you extend it with all of your different actors. Like you might also have API key, and an API key might be like this. Maybe it doesn't have an ID. Maybe it just authorized with the workspace. Again, we can provide this actor context, and a lot of this glue we can like kind of hide behind the scenes. So again, like I don't see why someone would build their own actor context. I think for the most part, this context stuff will be hidden. Yeah, cool. So I think that's everything. Anything else that pops up?
Hey Jay, in the beginning you mentioned about like what your thoughts on the routes. Sorry, Dax, what's that?
No, we can talk about things you just brought up.
Wait, what's that?
we can talk about what you just asked.
Oh yeah. Jay, what's your thoughts on adding the routes when you do?
Yeah, I mean, I think a big piece of this is like when I look at what are the few different things we're doing here. One is like we're helping you write handler functions that handle specific events. We didn't really talk about it here, but like like just like conceptually think about it. It's like, okay, Lambda event sort of comes in, we like wrap around that and we help you do stuff. Then there's this concept with the auth of like, in this case, it's doing 2 routes, but it could do more, like you guys sort of said, and you kind of want to hide that.
Mhm.
And so there's like another sort of like concept that's being added there. And then there's this the context stuff or the hook stuff, which is like basically hooking into the event system and eventually the output system of a Lambda function.
Mhm.
There are like a few different things there, and we kind of talked about this in our previous call, where it makes sense that these things are like, you don't have to release them all together, but they have to be cohesive. Like the concepts across the board for all the different handlers have to be cohesive. And just first impressions, like I'm not sure if I would bucket the auth and the GraphQL as like of the same type of handlers, like conceptually. I'm not sure yet. So that is the thing I think I just want to look at a little bit of like, this is really exciting in that we're stepping into sort of new territory here, right? It's this, like, to me feels more like a Lambda framework.
Well, why does GraphQL and auth feel different to you?
Partly, I guess, because like not currently what it is. Even currently, it's like, okay, so let's say like, auth is adding or handling 2 routes behind the scenes, but in the future it could do a lot more. Whereas when I think about GraphQL, I think about the event bus or like SQS or whatever. Like I'm thinking in almost Lambda terms, like Lambda event terms.
Mm-hmm.
Again, GraphQL, yeah, is maybe a step above like just sort of like the basic set of events, but this one is like even more above than that. And they might all get bundled together. It might be fine, but yeah, this is the part I think I just want to think about a little bit more of like, again, you don't have to launch them all together, but you don't want to introduce new concepts every single time you put out a handler per se. So,
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
yeah.
the GraphQL being like you're adding a route to the API. Back then I felt that made sense because like it is an API route, right? For auth, I don't think people necessarily relate auth to adding API routes. What, for example, user pool construct has this thing where they have this thing of like a hosted, like Google login
Yeah, the
plus
hosted
callback.
UI, right?
Yeah, hosted UI thing, right? It's essentially what we have here, right? And over there, things that people set is like, oh, what domain do I want to run this on? Usually it's like a custom cognito URL that gives you for the callback and stuff, right? Like you could put your own domain there. I don't know if people would think that, oh, what I'm really doing here is like creating like a route.
What
I guess I'm
about
still
this? What about this? Like, how do you guys feel about something like this?
plugins.
Well, I guess like, and this is
Yeah.
maybe why I want to look at the event bus one as well. Like, again, I think I'm bundling them all together here. They might not be bundled all together conceptually.
I think they are. I do think they are bundled together because I don't bundle it under we're building functions for you, which, it seems like the obvious thing that's in common, but I think what they're bundled under is you're defining the source of truth inside your application code. You're like defining what happens and how it works in your application code. And I think that's what's going to be common in all of these. And for a lot of them, like that ends up getting shipped as a Lambda function. But for me, like just as someone that like I hate doing this, like every single subscription I have, like I need to do this, like add another subscription every single time. And I need to do it here. I need to also remember to like go make the handler. I need to make sure like these all match and everything, like this path is correct. And it's not great. So the event bus situation, I just want it to say where my functions are. And I just want it to pick up all the subscriptions I have in there.
Yeah.
That's one option. The other option is to still be explicit here, but maybe like make this a little bit simpler. Subscriptions and I don't know.
Can you write out what the shape of the actual handler function would look like?
Yeah, so I think it would be. I already have this, so let me just edit what I. So it wouldn't be this. It would be more like handle. Potentially like this. Might end up being like. You might need to specify like other filters, and you might specify like on. Potentially like that. Like this, or like what I had earlier.
When you look at code like this, on the infrastructure side, like in the constructs when you're defining it, do you want to be able to say explicitly? Let me just use a different term here. Let's call this like an SST handler.
Okay.
As opposed to like a regular Lambda function handler. Do you, when I just look at the constructs code, should I be able to pick out, hey, that thing is a regular Lambda function event handler, and whereas this other one is an SST handler? Is that necessary? Like, sort of curious, I guess. Like, if I look at the code that you had, like the bare bones code for the auth, right? It's like there's a proxy route, and it's pointing to that thing. That line to me looks like a normal Lambda function handler, right? But when I go in there, it's like, oh no, it's not. It's a little bit different.
Yeah,
well, I mean, it's not super different, but it's like it's still like I don't quite know what it's doing when I look at it.
Yeah, I don't think you need to know the difference. I'm hoping eventually you have 0 non-SST handler functions.
Yeah, that's fair, but it seems like all the SST handlers will start to look similar, right? And then eventually, yeah, when you get to that point, it's like it's obvious. I just look at it, I'll be able to tell. Yeah, I feel like at this stage maybe. Yeah, because now going back to that question that you have, like, should we show it as plugins, or like the original question of like, would it be API.add auth, right? It's like now those ones start to get interesting because it's like now you're separating that from like a regular Lambda function handler. I don't know.
Right. I think right now I don't know if there's a point of like you look at the stack code, you'd be like, hey, that's a SST handler, because that is actually not an SST handler, right? What we are providing is really just a helper, a runtime helper that help you wrap around your handler, right? You could, even for GraphQL, right? Like the Pothos route, you could just do everything yourself. You don't have to import SST/node, right? So I don't think that is a SST handler. mean, if it were a SST handler, I'm guessing then we shouldn't need to wrap around it. It should, or like we would at bundle time we'll wrap around it. But you know, if you look at the code, now you might look something like complete different. Right? For example, for the auth handler, right? If it were like this unique SST handler, it might not export a handler. It might just export like a config, right? And then we do our wrapping behind the scene, right? Not sure if you.
Yeah.
No, yeah, I see what you're saying. Yeah.
And that's one idea we were kind of against, or the sense I got from you guys were like we were against from doing that because it's like too much magic.
Yeah, I just see. Yeah, I think. I've seen people stack traces where it looks really confusing because there's like a bunch of different like runtime imports happening. I think someone had that the other day with the Thundra stuff. So I think that's why I didn't like wrapping it at bundle time.
Okay. Yeah, I think what would help me is like if you were to just sort of list out, you know, here's potentially how you define these different type of handlers on the construct side. Here's what kind of the handlers look like, and then you know we get sort of an overview of like, yeah, do these conceptually look similar to us?
Yeah, I mean, here's just some examples, and I don't know. I think I gave a fourth example yesterday, right? I forgot what the other one was.
But this probably needs static code analysis to be able to pull out the.
Yeah, it does. But I think the examples I gave yesterday, 2 of them required it and 2 of them didn't. So let me check. GraphQL was the other one, which doesn't. So I think as of now, it would look something like this. And I think I've seen this type of thing in functions. Their stuff looks cleaner, but I think it's gonna have bumbling issues on our end. Right, functions. Yeah, here. So they have this like functions.database on create. Let me find another example. No, cloud storage. Function, storage object, on finalize. So this is like they're really combining infrastructure as code and runtime stuff together. Like you can even say like you can manage like provision concurrency and stuff right here, but
that's probably why. That's why that's happening.
I don't think.
Yeah. So right. So the API one in this case is like on the infrastructure side, we're going to pull out what route it is and set up the route.
So yeah, these 2 are like more advanced where this would step us in a direction of more infrastructure from code. But even without this, like this one probably look the same. It can just be like you just have to also manually go and set it up in the stacks code. And then this one would just look like this.
We brought in this where it said 15 minutes over here, and actually the details here.
Right. And API.handle will probably just do some wrapping, right? If you can return JSON,
I just
we'll
set up
add
the
status
context or
mode.
something.
Yeah, so the
And
context,
catch,
and maybe do the if we have the output
Yeah.
context as well. So that's what I'm saying. I think ideally, and we can also just have like any, I don't know,
Because like
any kind of thing, and you can specify your event shape. This will also
set up the context.
Yeah. One of the things that's nice about these are if we do these for, this is minor, but I think people actually get stuck on this a lot. If we do this for most of the common things people use, they won't ever have to import from that types function, the types package, because people are always like, oh, what's the right type for an API v2 proxy? Like, that is kind of like a weird thing to have to learn up front. Whereas this, we would just inject the right type here. And I don't imagine people use too many of these, like at least the majority of people.
Okay, so then we can separate these design issues into like, this is, you know, quote unquote, like scope on its own, right?
Yeah.
So you don't have to touch, you don't have to make any changes on the infrastructure side, on the construct side to ship this.
Yeah.
And this will ship with this plus the context plus the hooks.
Yeah.
That was basically, it's like mostly we're trying to ship the hooks.
Well, I'm trying to ship the auth, so.
Well, yeah. But if you imagine, actually that one brings up a good point, right? Sorry, let me go a little bit lower. The last line, the function.handle, right? That would allow us to ship just the hooks. Potentially, I'm not saying that's what we'll do. Does that make sense? Am I saying that right? Like, if you just had function.handle and the event context stuff plus the hooks, and that is a thing that I could use today in my Lambda function code.
Yes, but we would have to make it look kind of like this. We need to know what kind of event it is.
Oh, because we can't quite, like, they would have to, let's say they would have to set the event context, right? They would need to do event context type.
Yeah, we can set it for them, but we need this piece.
Yeah. Got it. Yeah. So let's, which is fine, right? Let's assume, like, if, you know, the rest of SST didn't sort of exist and I just wanted like a hooks type thing, that is kind of what I would ship.
Yeah.
Which isn't as nice because we can obviously handle some basic events for you, right? So the API event now, yeah.
I mean that if you just ship that, I guess the context stuff is tricky. I don't know if you can provide that many meaningful contexts, right? Like if it's generic.
I mean, yeah, you could do the hooks
yeah.
package, right?
Yeah,
so,
I guess so. Yeah.
So no, if I'm just working up, see, then after that, if I do the API, it's basically, hey, I don't need to set the event context type. We can set it for you because we know it's an API. Then I could do the same thing for all the different type of Lambda function events, right? So not going up the list, just all the different ones, because auth is a bit different, right? Auth is like, I mean, there isn't such a thing as a Lambda function auth event, right? Like,
well,
so
auth is a bit. Yeah, auth. I guess we could create something different, right? Based on, I guess auth would be slightly different based on the provider type, right?
Right.
I guess,
but my, yeah.
Go ahead.
My point is, if I wanted to just ship event context and hooks and give you a nice experience, we would need to provide a handler for each event type. Right?
Yeah.
And that basically just like that ships that. Like anybody could use that today.
I guess.
So, well, hang on.
Yeah.
So that first thing, if we just provide function handle plus context, we can support like a bunch. We can just list. We can just go through the types package
Sure.
and pull out all the things that are useful. So this will support, API, SQS,
Right.
bus, etc. Then the next step would be to go and create dedicated handlers for each of these because we have ideas for additional stuff that we can do.
Right.
So the API one, we can ship a bunch of hooks that pull out cookies and like body parsing, response transformations, etc.
Wait, but by doing the first one, the function.handle, we could still pull up because we're passing in quote API. We could still parse, cookies
That's
and
true.
body.
Yeah, we don't need to. I was just thinking from like a layer perspective, like this.
Right.
We know enough today probably to do this.
Yeah.
This is like, I don't fully have all like enough good ideas to like handle a bunch of stuff.
Right.
I guess
but if we just consider exactly. See, if you just consider this scope, this is pretty straightforward. There's not that much to explain to people. Like they already get it, right? It's like an existing concept, a tweak on an existing concept, effectively. Everything above that, I forget about the GraphQL one, but the bus is different, and the auth is obviously different.
I guess
the
the
bus
bus
interesting because we would inject contextual information into the bus event, and we kind of be opinionated by the shape of the event that goes in the bus.
I guess
or if we did the infrastructure from code thing.
Yeah. Sorry, what did you say, Frank?
Yeah, like where are we going to define the shape for workspace dot created?
That's going to be that like module pattern. Declare.
I see.
Module. I have an example of it.
So in your application code, right? Yes.
Yeah. Like this.
Right. Can this leak to stack code? Because I guess we could use it. We could make use of this information there as well.
Yeah, I haven't figured out how. I think it's possible. I think it might be possible, but I haven't gotten that working. Yeah, because then you can help it help set up the subscriptions instead of a little bit less annoying.
Maybe put in that filter then.
Yeah. Okay. So then I've got a question for you guys. Now let's go back to the auth one. Right. So we created handlers for all the Lambda, right, events. What is auth to you guys then? It is a handler for X. What is X?
I guess my problem with auth was actually, that might not be related to your question. Maybe I'll bring that up later. Yeah.
But like, yeah, what would you call? What are we handling there? Like, what is the event? I mean, obviously, underlying event here is like the any event, right?
It's an API event.
Like, is it like it's the SST Auth construct event? Like, do you guys see what I'm saying? It's like I see
what you're saying.
It's a new thing now.
Yeah, it's technically different.
Yeah, I guess what else do we want to do with auth, right? Like, is there a chance? See, I feel like the API routes are one feature of auth, right? Are we going to, do we see ourselves shipping like a DynamoDB table that help people store some of the information automatically, right? If we do that, right, auth is more than just routes, and auth can have other handlers like on user created.
Exactly. The route is just like a way for it to integrate with your API, right? So basically, it adds a route to your API. And then this, like, how we think about this is what will relate to what the infrastructure code will look like. But, and again, we don't have to like resolve this in this call per se, but I just wanted to separate, I guess, and get a feel for like what the landscape is of these things that we're working on.
I don't know what you're
Yeah. And I guess the next follow-up question would be like, yeah, is there commonality between that and the GraphQL handler and the event bus one, or if there are any other ones that we can think of?
Yeah, I think for like I have this as API.handle bus.handle just because it's like it's terse. But what these actually are, you're creating a bus handler. You're creating a GraphQL handler.
I'm not sure whether
It's less that you're handling the bus event, and it's not like you're not handling a GraphQL event. You're creating a handler that can do GraphQL. And same with auth. Like you're creating a handler that can do auth.
So
the fact that it's handling a specific type of event should
yeah.
almost be transparent to you, because I'll give you an example. This bus one, you might do this. You might just handle the event bridge event, or we might let you set some options to say queue. I actually want this to go from event bus to a queue first, then I want to handle it. If you do that, then you might be handling the SQS event. As opposed to the event.
So how would a user learn about, it's like I'm learning about the construct, and there's a field or an option in the construct that takes let's call it like an SST handler, and you're expected to do create handler and export that, right? And I think what I'm getting towards here is like it almost feels like each construct is going to have its like the thing that goes with it. Yeah. And they might not follow, sort of same patterns as the other guys. And like if, for example, you're never going to be using an event bus, you never have to learn about it or know about it. But then I think the way we think about how even the GraphQL one, I think is a good example, or like now the auth one. It's like, so I go to the constructs page for the auth, and I find that I need to pass in SST handler for this thing, and that takes me ideally to some other page that like shows me how to write this, right? Yeah, and I'm just trying to work through my head like what would that look like? What would that experience sort of look like?
Yeah, I think the pattern with all of these are you're going to spin up some infrastructure.
Yeah.
Then you're going to use the infrastructure. So
right.
You're going to spin up an API, then you're going to use it to do GraphQL stuff. You're going to spin up an event bus, then you're going to use it. Then like here's how you actually use it. And I think the second part of that is always going to be like this stuff for the most part.
Yeah. Right now, the way sort of lambdas kind of work is just like I'm giving you these events, and you're basically just gonna like run some code off of them. For us here, it's a little bit different, I feel. Also, partly, I haven't seen something like this before, so it is like this is new to me.
That's it.
Yeah, I mean that's another way to think about it. Like you're in your infrastructure code, you're setting up a bunch of stuff that's going to start emitting events, and then in your services folder, you're setting up a bunch of stuff that's going to be handling those events.
Yeah, yeah. As opposed to like raw Lambda function events.
Yeah.
And so, yeah.
You've created an API, so now you have to go. Now that means any like API handlers you have in your code base will get activated. Create a bus. Now you create a bunch of event bus handlers to handle those messages.
I think so.
Yeah. So just to throw this out there, I don't think this applies here, but if we did do the sort of function wrapping where the auth.handle is like so say you've got the auth construct or whatever way we end up defining it, and you're passing in like a function. If that function is automatically wrapped with auth.handle, right? Like the resulting code, does that look similar across these handlers? I don't think they would, but you know, I'm like throwing that out there in the sense that like
I think only auth and GraphQL might be a bit different, but everything else are pretty much the same. DynamoDB, triggered by DynamoDB stream, Kinesis, queues, SNS, even bus. They are the same. Even with Cognito triggers, right? They're all the same, I think.
Yeah, that's what's interesting here, right? It's like almost everything is, except for some of these special ones, and then right, like what are these special ones? How do we document those special ones?
Yeah. GraphQL is almost even the same, right?
The thing with the other thing with the function wrapping is we can't do any like interesting typing stuff.
Yeah, I'm against the function wrapping thing.
You mean
So then it's
automatically
like, okay,
wrap, right?
yeah, automatically wrapping it. So then it's like you're explicitly setting these things.
Yeah, you have to like define the types here explicitly again, and it's effectively the same thing as explicitly it's writing API.handle.
Yeah, but going back to the event analogy, Dax. So yeah, how do you think about the auth specifically there? So you set up some auth infrastructure, and that thing emits some events, and in this case, it's emitting like multiple events.
Yeah, I mean, is there anything wrong with the developer perceiving it that way? Like, oh, just like everything else, I created an auth construct, so now I need to set up something to handle auth events. Under the hood, an auth event looks identical to an API gateway event, but is like, do they need to be aware of that? Is it wrong for them to view it as auth construct? Now there's an auth handler.
Yeah, this is interesting. Yeah, I mean, I think it should be. That should work.
I mean, GraphQL is another example, right? Like, you're probably thinking, oh, there's GraphQL requests coming into my system now. Even though in reality there's not. There's only API gateway events coming in.
Yeah, I feel it should be different shape, right?
Should be a different shape. But so how would how would we conceptually how would we document this stuff, you think? Like each of the different like handler codes. What would that even look like in our doc site? What do you think? you have a separate section for handlers?
For sure, that would be a separate
Where we listed all
section
the different
for.
handlers.
No, I mean that would be a separate section for this package, right? This npm package, right? We're going to document it there, and then in each construct, we are going to add an example of what the handler will look like. Right now in the construct doc, we don't show you anything that's in the application side. But from now on, it seems every construct would have a section of what the corresponding handler would look like.
Yeah, that's what's really interesting here. Okay, Mm-hmm. And what happens if like, what happens if for the auth handler, I don't know why I would do this, but for the auth handler, I just write out like a regular Lambda function.
I mean, like for auth and GraphQL, right? For
that.
these two handlers, there's no corresponding construct to map to, right?
Yeah, there isn't. But imagine I just wrote, because I guess one of the problems I have with this is it's so loose between the two, between the infrastructure and like, how do you? Okay.
I think we need to articulate what our issues are right now. I feel like we are.
Let's go with the auth one here. Okay, so auth, I defined a handler for any route, and then I open up a new file. I am going to start writing this handler. So far I know that a Lambda function like handler looks like this. I just like naturally I would like go out and write that. How are you going to teach me that I should not do that anymore? Because there isn't like a tight link, right? Like it's not like my editor will pick it up.
I have an issue with the lack of tight link also. And what you're describing is one problem from it. My problem has just been I don't have a single place to define something and have it work. I have to update things in two places always. And for some stuff that's good, like stuff that's really stateful, like I want to explicitly create my DynamoDB table in the Sax code. But I don't want to go define all the fields and all my entities in the Sax code. I can just do that in my application. But for other stuff that's like ephemeral, like again, going back to event bus subscriptions, like I just want to do new event bus in my Sax code and never touch my Sax code again. I just want to like do everything in a single place to add events.
Yeah, there's the other side of this of like, and I've had an issue with this before where like error handling, what if I'm like, sorry, by mistake handling like the wrong event type or something in my Lambda function, like the error that I get is not super informative. Like it should actually tell me, hey, this, you should be expecting this event type, and you're not handling that or whatever. Like it should be typed in some ways.
Yeah, exactly, and that's what this new setup will do that, because you're explicitly saying you're expecting a certain event. Although I don't know, we can definitely show better errors. I don't think it'll be perfect though.
Yeah, I might need to think about it a bit more, but I've had this issue with like the Lambda system for a while. It's very arbitrary, the link between the infrastructure and like the code.
Yeah, and you sometimes see people even doing this on purpose, where they'll have a single function that's handling different. Like reuse an API function somewhere else, which like that should also be discouraged in the framework.
Yeah, maybe give me a little bit of time to think about it. Maybe we might do another call.
Yeah.
Okay.
Did Frank step away? There's one more thing I wanted to
show. No, he shouldn't have. He's still there, I think. Did he actually step away?
I might just went on mute.
I mean, he's like right behind the wall. and
Oh,
walk over and
you're
check.
both in the WeWork?
Yeah, we're part of the WeWork.
Oh.
Wait, is he not in the stream? You can't tell?
I mean,
No,
he's turned off his
stream is
camera
dead.
and he's muted, so.
All right, let me go see what's going on. I think he might be on the.
Okay.
Were you on the phone? Oh man.
All right, yeah. One more thing or something before we step out.
Wait, yeah, sorry, I went to the washroom. Did you guys decide anything?
No, he. I think Dax wanted to say something, and then you went missing.
Yeah, I just had
sorry.
like one other thing to show. So the other thing I wanted to make sure that we supported is dynamic providers. Oh crap. What did I do? There we go. So like, yeah, you can list, all your different providers here, Google, Twitter, etc. And this makes sense for like a B2C application. But if you're doing a B2B application and by default, you maybe use Google or email, but some customers have like a SAML or like a single sign-on thing set up.
Wait, sorry, hold on. I have an idea. What if what if when you did SST deploy, the auth construct checked the handler and told me it was not defined correctly or whatever? I guess my bigger question is like, why don't we just do that for?
I mean, ideally, you want that to happen at build time, right? Or at least in the editor, it should tell you.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if we start to step into the static analysis stuff that enables a bunch of interesting things like that, like we can say like no handlers found because
exactly
you didn't,
or like this is the wrong type of handler, right? Or like ideally what I want is like as you're typing it out, like your editor is telling you that this is wrong, right? How would we do that?
I guess that you would need to be like define the inline, define the handlers inline in your stack code.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like, I feel like there should be a middle ground there, or is there?
You don't define inline, you import.
Yeah, that's called a closure compiling, I think. That's like the term for it. You take everything inside the closure and you pull it out because it's not part of the stacks code. And you can statically analyze that. And that's what like Sam Goodwin, like all his experiments
that's what he does
are, yeah, in that category. So that's one extreme where it's your stacks code and your runtime code all together. The next place to land is less extreme, which is this kind of what I like. Someone described with the event bus where you don't actually define much in your stacks code. You define very little in your stacks code. And to do anything, it's all in your application code. So there's not like a thing to tie to another thing. There's just the other thing.
Right.
So if you want to do auth, you need to add an auth handler to your app somewhere.
Also, yeah. I guess I'd want to compare the two approaches a bit. But so I think this addresses like the issue that I have is like if you introduced a new concept, like sure, yeah, you can show people in the docs, or you can tell them like, hey, this field doesn't actually take a lambda function anymore. It takes this other thing. This is what the other thing looks like. Or you just like solve that problem, as a whole without going through the docs. It's just like it just shows up in your editor, and you know what you're supposed to pass in to handle, whether it's an auth event, a lambda event, an API event.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've always found there's like a weird link between the two, and even obviously in this case, it's like both code bases are sitting in the same repo. Like the understanding is kind of that like the Lambda thing is a separate node application, right? That's going to run when an event happens. But now that we're stepping into this like slightly murky boundary, I feel like you'd want to deal with the linkage problem or whatever a little bit better. Like AWS can like, they can wipe their hands off and be like, no, it's just a thing. Just give me a zip file. I'm going to just run it inside a Lambda function container. When this event happens, it's up to you, whatever you do in there. Right. And they're keeping it like very separate, but we're not, right? Like, if we want to step in this direction, I feel like I'd want to address it.
That's interesting thought. That this could be another way how we divide up, like progressively move away from CloudFormation, where everything in your stack, you just do new API, you set your custom domain, whatever stuff there, in new event bus, and but the subscribers, the routes, we would add it through the API, and those are in your code.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think that to me feels like the next step, because like if we're thinking about, okay, we're building a Lambda function framework, that like almost all of that should be inside your application code.
Mhm.
So yeah, the API stuff should go in there, the bus stuff should go there, the auth stuff should go in there. The way, like, we could even say for this auth stuff, there's actually no stacks code at all, period. You just define auth.handle in your code base, and that turns it on. And yeah, so
I think that's easier for auth, but for other API routes, right? Like, only thing is that you have all these other props you can set on the route, right?
Yeah, like the timeout and the permissions and like all of that stuff.
Yeah.
It's like you either lose the ability to do that, or you have to like with timeout, with blah blah.
Yeah.
Okay, anyway, yeah, let's continue, sorry.
All right, dynamic provider.
Okay, so anyway, so real quick, you can have a static set of providers.
Right.
But if you're a B2B application, some of your users have different providers than others. So my idea for this is, in the front end, you can do auth start. Okay, let's say you have a custom provider. Custom, and then you should be able to pass in any kind of state here, tenant ID. Say like you do this based off of the URL, you ask them what their tenant ID is, whatever. Tenant name rather. So you should be able to implement your own provider that dynamically returns an actual provider. So you can say like,
so you can do a lookup of what Acme is right?
Yeah, exactly. I don't remember exactly how this is. So it would be like authorize. What you currently get is back URL and the state. You can do like SAML config equals tenant get config state dot tenant name, something like this. And if they have it configured, you can return SAML provider and pass in the config, whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, you can return Google provider or whatever.
Right.
Whatever else, what you're going to fall back to. Or I guess you wouldn't really fall back to anything, because the front end should get this far. Turn error. Yeah. So I think this supports. Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, if you fall back to the Google provider, I guess which guy's on success getting called, the Google or custom?
Yeah, I need to figure out the API for this exactly. Like this technically has an on success, which isn't exactly right. So I need to figure out how this works. Yeah. So this will support. Again, I think most people getting started, especially for Create SST, like will just have this in there, something like this, and they'll just have auth. Boom, they're done. And then this B2B stuff is where like a lot of these frameworks just start to suck. Like dynamically picking a provider and all of that. So I want to make sure we support both of these flows.
I guess currently the typical flow people do is say, hey, we enter your email address, and then they pull up the domain, they pass that to a backend, and be like, what auth provider does this domain have, right? If domain has single sign-on.
Yeah, they can. You can implement it that way. The issue with that is this might not matter for most people, but the reason I didn't implement it that way in my app is you're technically like leaking information there. Like you don't know who this person is, but you're already telling them that oh, here's how you auth, because we know that this business has an account with us.
Right.
So yeah, like, I didn't want to like show that. Like in the flow that I have, you actually have to auth twice if you don't know who your provider is. It's just like Slack. You have to either know your workspace ID, and if you don't, then you have to prove that you own the email. Once you prove you own the email, then we'll show you how to log into everything.
Right.
Okay. So the next steps for me here, I think, so we talked about a lot of things, but I think what doesn't change is this configuration. Like I need to like figure out what the configuration, like this roughly works, but there's like some things that aren't exactly right. So I need to finalize this. I need to give you a way to easily create a session once you've once you should be able to do something like I don't know, like return. I think we talked about like cookie strategy, and then like I don't know, like the user ID and the tenant ID, like whatever you need in there, where you can have local storage strategy. I don't know if I want to go this far, but at minimum, I want to help you generate a JWT that contains whatever information you need to contain. And then you should be able to call use session anywhere in your functions to get that decoded version of JWT out.
And how would you access that JWT in your API requests?
Like, what do you mean in the API request? Like use session would look for it in the header.
In the header, I see.
The authorization bearer token thing. I think that's the right approach for this.
So we pretty much just help them to put it in the response, and then you can do use session to fetch it in after, right after. Okay.
Yeah, like the front end will need to do, and maybe our front end library can handle this, but so the issue is you probably can't use a cookie approach with our stuff because you technically can, depending on your setup, but your API might be in a different domain than your front end. And if they're not in the same subdomain, your API cannot set a cookie for your front end. So most likely you're gonna have to do a redirect to where your front end is with like token, and we'll help you generate the token. And then on the front end, when it starts, it should do like if query token local storage set token, something like that. So then in your front end, you'll have access to the token, and then you can wire it up to you can make sure it goes up in the API requests.
Right.
That's what's nice about the cookie, though. If you do it as a cookie and you can set the cookie from your API, then like there's nothing to do on the front end. You can just set the cookie and then it'll just go up automatically with every request.
Mm. Okay. Yeah, I guess the handler stuff, right? Like the shape of the routes and handler, does that block us from shipping out auth?
Yeah, let me give it some thought, and then
Okay.
yeah, let's talk about it.
Yeah. Someone just asked a question. I really like the suggested API for auth. One thing that comes across mind, we'll need some kind of helper to get the secrets for the config, whatever secret store we're using. Yeah, so this, we're shipping this. I put like a shim here to like not make this error. But we're working, this is going to be a real package. And this will be this will like fetch it from SSM, and they'll actually eventually open your console eventually, so you can set these values. And it'll all be type safe. So you'll basically have this config object, and it'll autocomplete all the different secrets you have in your app. So this should be pretty simple to set up. That's another thing. I think to ship the auth stuff, we probably want the config stuff in place. Maybe it would make it nicer. So yeah, anyway, I'll continue to finish like the actual implementation under the hood for this. And we'll have to decide how we're going to go about packaging this, because we might decide, okay, we don't have enough clarity on like this broader thing, so but it's still worth releasing just off that deal. Or we might have this broader thing.
Hey Dex, do you actually ever see us shipping like a table or adding more stuff to auth, or would that most likely be another concept that we will ship?
I think the only one I can think of right now is there's two things. Actually, there's two. So if you want username password, we need to ship a way to store passwords, and we should like do that correctly out of the box for people, so they're not like doing bcrypt and all that themselves. So there we would like create a Dynamo table that's just like username, password. That's it. That's one thing. The second thing is an email auth. So in my app, I do email auth. That's the only auth that I have. But I don't do magic link. So it doesn't send you a link in your email. It sends you a PIN code, and you have to copy paste the PIN code into like the UI. The reason I did this is the other flow of Magic Link. If you look at Slack, they actually used to have Magic Link, and I got rid of it. I think the reason they did this is because you can do it naively, right? You can say, okay, I'm going to send a link. If you click on the link, you get logged in wherever you click on it. So, if you trigger it on your desktop and you click on it on your phone, you're going to be logged in on your phone. That's annoying because like you're not logged in the right place. And two, it's like a security issue because I can put your email, and if you get the email and you just click it by accident, or sorry, I mixed it up. So that's an annoying UX issue. So like you want to, like even if you get it on your phone, you want it to be logged in the original place. So then if you say, okay, well, make it so if you click the link, it'll log you in the original place. That's like a weird security thing because now I can send you an email. If you click it on your phone, I'll get logged in no matter where I am. I can kind of like remote log in if you accidentally click it. So that's why I switched to the PIN thing, because PIN gets you both. I can log in I can trigger the login on my desktop. I can see the PIN on my phone and just type it in because if I'm on like some other computer, I'm not logged in on my computer. And there's no way for someone to remote log in. Like you'd have to give them the PIN. But to support PIN, you need to store the PIN somewhere, at least temporarily. So that would require a Dynamo table as well.
And that the page where you're asking people to enter the pin, do you think that would be something rendered in the Lambda, or would that be a page on the front end?
Yeah, this is another thing I haven't thought about. Like, how is that actually going to work? I think the end user would have to build that UI, and they can trigger the callback with the pin, and if it'll succeed or it might not succeed. But maybe we provide a standard UI also. Like, that's something we can do.
Yeah, most likely it's like give people components that they can build it. Yeah, as opposed to like us hosting it or something.
Yeah.
Right.
So I think
us hosting it for them.
I think we'll probably support the bad UX version of Magic Link, where if you click it on your phone, you're logged in on your phone. That's like the least effort out of all of these. You don't need to sign up for Google Cloud and get a G Cloud, like a Google Client ID. You don't need to do any of this stuff. But actually, hang on. How do you send the email? I guess we can. Yeah, you still have to like set up SES at least. So I think all these auth things have some setup. Okay, so the other interesting thing is this client ID I have on my screen. This can be public. So we can say that, okay, we have a shared SST Google setup. Actually, no, but then the redirect URL won't work. Never mind. Yeah, you do have to go and set up something for each one of these providers.
Right, like with different providers now, you might need to set up SES. You might need to set up other stuff, right? How would the stack code look, right? Right now, it's all lived within a route. Would you pass all that into the route, or would you lift that into a construct and kind of like auth dot, you pass or new auth, you pass the API in?
Yeah, this is another place where this gets kind of messy. So right now, your stacks. Your stacks. Your stack code is completely unaware of your auth configuration. It doesn't know you're using Google. It doesn't know you're using Twitter. It doesn't have to know any of that. But actually, when we add the secrets, I actually might need to. But just for now, it doesn't need to know any of that. But if you add email and that needs SES, this kind of needs to know that you're using email so it can like spin up. I think SES is a bad example because I don't think we can do that automatically. You have to manually do that yourself. But if you're using email password, this needs to know we need to create a DynamoDB table for that.
Yeah.
So this again creates some like duplication where you might have to, if we do this like plugins thing, you might have to say like auth. Like you're gonna use the password version and you're gonna use the email thing. And you kind of have stuff in two places, which it's not great.
Right. It seems to me there's these two things we need to figure out, right? One is what's the interface, what's the API on the stack, and the other one is how do we standardize these like handler stuff?
Yeah. The API and the stack, I don't like. I feel like I can go either way. I have no idea. Like I feel like this is fine for now. Like just to get auth in people's hands.
What about what do you think about like creating a construct like called like, say we rename auth to current auth to Cognito, whatever, right? And making this the actual auth construct.
I like that. I think that's a decent option. So it'd be something like, and it would need the API, right?
Yeah. and probably specify API like base path or something, or path.
I mean, this goes to that thing you were talking about earlier. Should it be like this? You create the API, then you create auth, which augments the API, or should it be like this? You create the auth. Like I don't know what it would be.
Right.
Or does it go like this?
I prefer the other way, right? Because I feel right, auth is the thing that I'm creating. It just happens that it uses the API to do some callback.
Yeah, like over time, this might need other stuff, not just the API.
Yeah. 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 Cool. Yeah.
I think, even if we just ship what we currently have, this all looks pretty close to what people consider like, oh, this is easy auth. I have to look into some of this. Like, what happened? Can you not have two? What happens if you have two Google providers?
Yeah.
Or
I guess it's an array, right? Right now, it's.
Yeah, but how do you? I need to look into this more. Yeah, like if you look at, I was looking at this, their callbacks. Like you just get the same thing, no matter, because they also try to store the user for you, which I think is just a lot. But this API, like it should feel like this simple.
But where does it restore the user on?
Yeah, so there's like adapters for like.
I see.
But I really don't like this. Like, if I want this to fit into like my ElectroDB single table schema,
right.
I basically can't use this. And they kind of, and like some of the multi-tenant stuff I talked about, like the framework now needs to be aware enough to do all of that. Like they have this opinionated model of session, account, user, which is it's good. It's like a good way to model things, but it's just not guaranteed to work for everyone.
I guess we don't have to store for us, right? We could. I was leaning more towards like creating a new table and then manages, ourselves instead of writing into users database.
Well, I just think the shape, like I'll give you an example. Like if you're doing single table design, and you want to write like a very efficient schema, you might store your user information and some application specific concepts in the same partition.
I see.
And if the user stuff is in a different table, or if it's in the same table but like in some namespace that we manage, you don't have the ability to do that. So I feel like the user storage part is, as of now, it's good to leave that up to whoever's using it.
Yeah.
Yep.
Hey Jay, not sure if you caught it. Like I think the two part that's uncertain right now is right what the stack code looks like. That's relatively easier to figure out. And the handler thing you guys were talking about before.
Yeah, I think they're a little related, but yeah, let's talk about that and then we'll decide.
Actually, I just feel this is a chasm where we do the source of truth for a lot of infrastructures in the code.
Yeah.
And do we go with our CloudFormation, engine and stuff, right? I don't know what would be a factor that would like push us over the edge and be like, all right.
I mean, I think for this one, I don't really feel comfortable shipping an auth handler that's very different from all of our other things, unless we have a decent amount of clarity on what the other things will kind of look like. Yeah. Anyway, let's talk about it after, I think.
Mhm.
The CloudFormation stuff, I brought that up, but that's like to be like a longer term thing. I imagine like,
Yeah,
okay,
yeah.
we got all this stuff in place and now we're thinking about like the next version of Seed and how to make that really good. That's one of the things that we could do to make people just like Vercel. Like, why aren't you just using GitHub Actions? Because obviously you just use Vercel to deploy. Like, that's one of the things that can help that story.
Well, but over there, I would say, right, if you're able to figure out like a faster deployment engine, then now I might lean towards putting that right into SST instead of like you got to use Seed to.
I think it will go in SST also because for local development, you want the updates to your Stacks code to use that. But like we gotta put something behind Seed.
Yeah.
Yeah, you could just use GitHub Actions and do that. So,
Yeah.
Oh, you have to store the state somewhere. There you go.
Right.
That's how Terraform makes money.
Yeah. All right.
Okay.
All right.
All right. Cool.
All right, let's talk in a bit.
Okay. All right. See you guys.
All right. See you.